Hello and welcome to Cyberside Chats. My name is Sherry Davidoff,
I'm Matt Duran.
and the U.S. recently completed a military operation in Venezuela. And reports are that prior to that military operation, there were internet and power outages.
Right.
And in fact, there were a lot of rumors swirling about this and the cause of it, in part because on January 3rd, in a press conference, President Trump said that, quote, the lights of Caracas were largely turned off due to a certain expertise that we have. So, what did people think because of it?
Well, that combined with the statement by Don Kane saying that as we began the approach, we started a layered attack against them, including Spacecom, Cybercom, and others. People immediately went to, we use cyber attacks against Venezuela to cut their power grid, which then seems to have also cut their internet off.
I
So,
mean, it's very
yeah,
dramatic. Like we hacked in and we took things down. But most likely, that's not the reality. And so, what we want to do today is go through the actual evidence that we have, because
mhm,
there's been some good technical analysis of this, and then talk about what we can learn from this. Because really, accidental power outages happen all the time.
mhm,
And Venezuela, in fact, had a pretty fragile infrastructure to begin with. So, what
right.
can we learn from this that will help us in our everyday lives?
Yeah, we also want to talk about how when an event like this happens, whether it be military intervention, a natural disaster, or something else, it really creates very fertile ground for cyber criminals to start going after both victims and people who would be willing to help them. So we'll get to that near the end of the
Yeah,
podcast.
we
But
just
yeah,
talked about that last week, I think, when we were talking about the Epstein files
right,
redaction as
yeah,
well. Any big news is a big opportunity for cyber criminals.
right,
So, all right, let's dig in. So, from the technical side of things, really the reason this caught our attention was because of a report by Low Orbit Security,
yeah,
Graham Helton. And this was pretty interesting. Graham went through Cloudflare Radar's route leak data
hmm,
and found evidence of BGP anomalies, routing anomalies relating to Venezuelan state internet service providers.
right. Yeah, and specifically, he was looking at the routing or the BGP or border gateway protocol routing for CAN TV, which is like one of the big
Mm.
ISPs in that part of Venezuela, and he was noticing some strange inconsistencies that were kind of like deprioritizing their internet traffic. And for those of you that are not familiar with the term, BGP is the protocol that basically determines like your fastest route through the internet when you send data. So if that's misconfigured, your data can either end up getting black holed or it just becomes very slow to actually traverse through the network.
So the nerd rumor mill went flying.
Yeah,
There were all kinds of like technical chats on this, and in fact, Cloudflare the next day issued a response to this,
they
which
did.
I
Yeah.
thought was really interesting. So Cloudflare did their own analysis of the internet routing anomalies, and essentially what they said was, "Hey, anomalies happen all the time."
Sure.
In fact, they noted specifically there had been many routing anomalies since December 2025 already. And they said there was no evidence that the anomalies were malicious or tied to the military operation.
Yeah. And I mean, this kind of anomaly isn't unique to Venezuela. This happens all
No.
over the world. And when we look at, as was in the Cloudflare report, I mean, when we look at CAN TV specifically, I mean, they've had this problem before. So basically, Cloudflare came out and said this looks, more like something like a misconfiguration
Mhm.
than something that is, malicious in nature. Now, in reality, you could, if you were able to get in and hijack that route, you could use something like this to degrade internet service or, potentially intercept
Oh,
traffic or something like that.
absolutely.
But in this case, according to Cloudflare anyway, it doesn't look like that was the case. But that didn't stop, again, the rumor mill from taking
No.
off and, multiple different articles being published about this exact problem.
Well, and one of the known major fragilities with the internet is BGP
Hmm.
and routing.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember when I was at MIT, gosh, I think this was 25 years ago, Rainey Perlman, who was one of the inventors of the internet, I think you could say that. She invented the spanning tree protocol.
Right.
And she did a whole talk, I remember this so clearly, where she discussed the fact that you can't really trust BGP,
Hmm.
that it can easily be manipulated. And really, we should be looking at pushing routing more towards layer three. And she made this whole case for it, which I found fascinating.
Yeah, and I mean, she's got some good points. And it's mainly because when we talk about BGP, it's related to trust, not verification, but like a trusted route. And it's really, if
Yeah.
there's a break in that route, it's really slow to correct itself.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, there's other ways that we could do this. Now, whether we're going to use them, who knows?
Yeah.
But.
All
Yeah.
right, we're not to get
Sorry.
too
Yeah.
nerdy on everybody. Sorry about that. Okay, so what was the actual cause of this issue?
Right. So when we look at the actual cause of this issue and we look at the power going out, the internet going out, and the timing between those two, and this was brought up in a couple of different articles where we talk about the potential for a cyber attack against Venezuela, it looks like this was probably more related to what they call kinetic effects.
Yeah, so what that means is cascading failures relating to physical actions. For
Yeah.
example, a strike, an explosion. I liked the example you provided earlier, where, for
Mhm.
example, if a power facility is taken down, the
Yeah.
ISP goes down
Yeah,
as well.
exactly.
And we know from even in the U.S., if part of your power grid goes down, those can really create ripple effects through the whole system.
Yeah, it stresses the rest of the power grid
Yeah.
at that point, especially if you're trying to either redirect or, reroute or something like that. And in a country like Venezuela, which is not known for having really robust infrastructure when it comes
Right.
to power or internet, that can become a really difficult thing to do. And so the fact that we started seeing power going out roughly the same time that we saw internet going out really does point to it being more of a physical attack against facilities rather than something like a cyber attack.
Which is sad because it's so sexy to think about hackers breaking down and taking down the power grid. But in
Yeah,
reality, it's more likely related to some physical action that
right.
was taking
Yeah.
place. Good thing Starlink swooped in to the rescue. Want to
Starlink
talk
did,
about
yeah.
this? What did you think?
So yeah, this was interesting. So similar to what happened in the Ukraine when they began their conflict with Russia, Starlink came in and offered free Starlink service to basically compensate for the lack of physical internet service providers in the area,
Right.
or at least available ones.
For a month.
For a month, yeah. The big difference here seems to be that in the Ukrainian event, Starlink actually shipped like 20,000 Starlink satellites over there, and all the gear you would need
And
to actually hook
donated
them up,
them.
and donated them. Came back around to a government stipend after that, but that's not something we need to talk about here. In Venezuela, it doesn't look like that's the case. It looks like they're offering a month of free service, but if you want to utilize it, you have to buy the Starlink equipment. And so the thing that I don't really like about that is that yes, it's a great offer and they're great for doing it. Starlink is doing a nice thing here, but unless you already have Starlink internet, it doesn't really help you because I mean a lot of the people in the area can't either get Starlink equipment delivered to them because well they're in the middle of a
Their
conflict.
infrastructure is
Yeah,
down.
their infrastructure's down, or they can't afford it in the first place because Starlink
Right.
equipment's fairly expensive. It's not like the cheapest thing on the planet. But again,
Maybe they got a discount.
maybe they did. Kudos to Starlink. It's a great offer that they're
You know
putting
what
out
it
there. But
reminds me
yeah,
of, honestly?
hmm.
Free credit monitoring.
it
It's like,
it
hey,
kind of
free
does.
credit monitoring, and then you can pay for it after
Yeah.
that. Except in this case, people, I'm sure, really come to rely on it. But it is a good alternative when your physical infrastructure is
Oh, sure. Yes.
not super
Something that just
reliable.
relies on the satellite is going to be
Yeah.
far superior to what they have.
Now, I know we had a warning from CISA.
We did.
Do you want to share some details of that?
Yeah. So I would expect CISA would probably issue actual guidance on this at some point, but as of now, they've issued what they call a heightened awareness alert. And what they're basically pointing out is, and this has to do with several factors, but they're worried about retaliatory attacks against, nations like the U.S. because of intervention in Venezuela.
I mean, this happens every time there's
Yeah.
a major international conflict. I think the risk of attacks goes up.
Yes.
Not just from the country being attacked. In fact, if their infrastructure is down, probably
Probably
not
not
from
from them,
Venezuela.
yeah.
Weren't there concerns about Venezuelan ransomware at one point?
Yeah, there was. And then that pretty quickly changed to it being Brazilian ransomware, which is an actual threat.
Ah,
Yeah.
interesting. And Russia,
Yeah.
China, and other actors
Yeah.
that might potentially be allies.
Other
in Venezuela.
other BRIC members that are in that kind of oil pipeline that they maintain, and so that's the worry. We have sophisticated nation state actors who are already targeting the U.S. The worry is that because we went after someone who may be a partner of theirs, that those attacks are going to increase in either sophistication or intensity. Which, again, when we see things like this happen, like the Iran conflict, when Israel and Iran went to battle with each other, and the U.S. got involved, we actually did see an increase in attacks against U.S. infrastructure,
Sure.
and it wasn't by Iran; it was by hacktivist groups or other nation state actors that were sympathetic to them, that then decided they wanted to step into the game and see if they could, tip the scale in one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, you can have a war without ever having to get off your couch.
Sure.
As Dr. Dan Gears once said, you're on the internet, you're 150 milliseconds away from every psychopath path on the planet. And I would say also from every hacktivist
Yeah.
and anybody else who
Yeah,
wants to jump in and take a stand.
you're pretty close,
Yeah.
but again, this leads to again fertile ground for these kind of attacks to happen. Not just this, but like other kinds of cyber attacks as well. So, do you want to talk about those for a minute?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when we again when we see instances like this happen, it creates an environment that is kind of ripe for scamming.
Oh, yeah,
And
absolutely. And
when
your identity
yeah,
infrastructure might be down. People might not be able to receive MFA. We've certainly seen that with some of our global clients
sure,
around the world where they're trying in an emergency to figure out how to authenticate people.
yeah,
So maybe it's actually a good time to walk through some of our key takeaways here.
yeah, I think that's great.
Okay, number one, treat any kind of disruption as a security incident. Even if you're not sure, who's behind it or what exactly is happening, if there is a major outage that's affecting your organization, there are going to be some security repercussions and ripple effects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The next thing, when we see a system that becomes impacted like this, whether it be through natural disaster or military intervention or something like that, I mean, assume your identity controls will degrade under that kind of stress. As an example, I mean, if you have home internet connection and your ISP goes down because of something like this, maybe you don't use normal coffee wire or coffee shop wireless or something massively insecure like that. But if their internet's working and yours isn't, you may go ahead and hook up to it. You may bypass your MFA. You may revert it back to text messaging.
Sometimes people make really huge changes
Yeah,
in an emergency. Again, I think MFA is a really good example where, oh, it's really slow or it's not working reliably. We're just going to turn it off for a little while
yeah,
and then
exactly.
your risk goes up. And along those lines, lock down your emergency access before you need it. We just did a tabletop this fall, actually, a couple different tabletops, where the organization was using a platform in order to communicate in an emergency.
Right.
And when they shifted over to it in the tabletop exercise, what they found was that, oh, people didn't remember their passwords, people hadn't properly registered. And, sometimes you're so sure ahead of time everybody has this set up, but unless you practice, you don't really know.
Yeah, exactly. Next, when we talk about crisis communications, you really want to make sure, and this is something that we cover in basically all of our tabletops with public exposure involved, you want to make sure that you are controlling the narrative. You want to have pre-approved crisis communications and make sure people aren't kind of, shooting from the hip when it comes to describing what's actually happening with a situation. You also want to make sure that your messaging is very clear about what is going on with your organization or what is going on with your service levels.
I love the pre approved crisis
Yeah.
communication tip here. You want to have pre approved communication templates for internal folks. So, what are you going to say to your employees? And how are you going to reach them? And then, what are you going to say to the outside world, to the media, to anybody else, customers, whoever is affected? Often, people assume they're going to handle that during the incident, whenever marketing has a chance to really understand what's going on. And the reality is, if your communications are interrupted, that is not the time to try to draft new communications messages. You
Yeah.
want to have some basic stuff set in advance. I think that's often, when you have cyber insurance, often you can get connected ahead of time with like a public relations firm that may well have some templates available in advance. So,
Oh, yeah. Most of the cyber attorneys that I've worked with
yeah.
have suggestions
And
on
they have
what language should look
templates and
like. And
things
yeah,
like that. So make that part of your planning process. Connect your PR staff to firms like that so that you can get those templates ahead of time.
yeah, good call.
Last one, test your decision making under pressure, not just your tools. All too often, when we're doing tabletop exercises, people say, we'd all get together and decide. I think we
Hmm.
heard that over and over this fall. And the reality is, you really need to identify who is responsible, especially if there's a potential outage, because you may only be able to reach one person and they may not be able to reach all the other people that they want to consult with. So make sure that's part of your culture, that it's okay for one person to make a decision in an emergency and understand how those decisions are made.
Yeah, and there's a way that you can test this out. And since we're just getting out of the holiday season here, at least at the time that we're recording this, it reminds me of A Christmas Story with the little orphan Annie storyline. And Ralph gets the little decoder, and the decoded message he gets is, "Be sure to drink your Ovaltine. Be sure to do your tabletops." Your tabletops are how you test these things. Test them out in a simulated scenario ahead of time. Make sure that what you're doing actually makes sense, and it gives you a better idea of how your organization would actually respond in a situation like this, not just from a technical standpoint, but from a business standpoint as well. That becomes super important.
Good advice. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week on Cyberside Chats.